Okay, people, get excited. Today we're going to talk about JavaScript, we're going to talk about strings, and we're going to talk about this beautiful function called JavaScript Substring that is going to allow you to basically take a part of a string and make it its own independent string. Before we go into details though, I don't really have a lot of prerequisites for this video, but I do want you to be able to understand code that looks like this. If you can successfully tell me what's going on with this var, and this var could be a let or could be a const, but if you don't know them, that's fine. I just want you to be able to understand what this var is doing in here, what these quotes are doing right here, and what this console.log is doing. If you can successfully do that, that's basically all I need for you to be able to fully understand this video. If you don't though, that's okay. I'm going to put a couple of videos in the description below for you to be able to get all that fundamental JavaScript knowledge that you need to be able to fully take advantage of this video. Okay, so let's talk about the substring function. But before using the function in the code, I want to talk about how the function looks like. And in JavaScript, we use the word syntax to describe how a function looks like and how a function is going to be used. Well, technically, it could be any single aspect of the language can be described with its syntax. So the JavaScript substring function, its syntax looks like this. And there's a couple of elements I want us to be aware of. For example, you will notice that we need to have a variable to be able to use the substring function. And we will also need two arguments to send into the function, the start index and the end index. And notice how the end index has these brackets right here. This basically means that the end index is going to be an optional argument. Yeah, but what's an index? That's a very important topic to be able to understand in order to use this function. So let's say that, let me clean this over here. Let's say that I have a string. I basically am able to, let's say that I have the string hello. I'm basically able to count every single character in the string starting at 0 and giving it a number. For example, this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. So for example, the index of the O would be 4 and the index of the E would be 1. That's what we called an index. And as we can see right here, for JavaScript or for this substring function, we need a start index and we need an end index. And remember, the end index is optional. With that said, let's stop talking about all this theory and let's actually use the substring function in the code. So I'm going to go to my Visual Studio Code, and before we go into coding, I want to talk about some setup that I have in my Visual Studio. I have this extension that's basically going to run every console log that I have in my code. For example, if I do console.log welcome to Cadejo.dev, oops, I cannot spell my own website, Cadejo.dev, you're going to see how I have my output right over here. And if I do something like var x equal 1, for example, and I do console.log x, you're going to see how it prints the value that would be console log. And I have that, I think it's a very useful plugin for Visual Studio in order for you to be able to see what I'm doing without me having to run the code all the time. That can be a little bit annoying for the student. So it's called Quokka and it's right here. And I would really recommend that you use it for really simple scripts if you want to see what's going on with your code without having to run it all the time. So let's let's remove all of this code and let's actually start using the substring function. Okay, I'm going to start by making a variable var original string, and I'm gonna put something random like, I don't know, Kali is the heartbeat of the universe. Who's Kali, you may be asking? That's my dog. Don't worry, you're going to meet her soon. I know you're dying to meet her, but for now, let's just focus on this string, right? And then I'm gonna say something like console.log. And just to start, let's put any random number and see what happens. Remember, we only need one argument. We can send two of them, but for now, let's send only one. So I'm gonna say original string, Visual Studio dot substring, and I'm going to say index 5. So notice how that's basically taken from the beginning of the string until the end of the string. And I'm going to guess that this 5 over here is going to be the index of this I. So I have a PowerPoint ready where we can basically take a look at the string that I just wrote and have every single index on it. And notice how 5 is the index of the I. So basically, if I put 5 in the substring, I'm grabbing from this part over here until the very end of the string. It's going to be a very important thing for us to keep in mind as we keep exploring the function. So for example, if I come back to the code and I do something like, let me for example copy paste this one over here, and instead of 5 I want to say 22. So it's going to take from the start of that index, which is going to be this off in here, until the very end of the string. What happens if I do 21? 21 is technically the empty space before the off. Let's see what happens. So it's a little bit hard to see, but let's put them side by side. Let me go back to the 2, and I'm gonna put 22. So notice how we have an empty space right here. That's basically the empty space of the index 21. Now, before we move on, let's document what's going on. So I'm going to say send in one argument, argument to substring will take from start index, that's the argument we are sending right now, to the end of the string. And before we try to send two arguments, let me show you what's going to happen if I print the original string. Notice how any of these two lines, they're not really changing the contents of the variable that I have in line 1. They are actually just making a new string that I can then later use. Let me just refactor or make changes to line 5, where I'm just going to say var is the heartbeat of the universe. And that's going to be equal to original string dot substring 5. And then instead of just console.log in this entire thing, I'm going to say is the heartbeat of the universe. And I'm going to get the exact single thing, because substring in this part of the code, it's basically making a new string that's going to be stored in the variable. So what's going on is, let me clear this. This part over here is making a new string that's going right here, and then I can reuse it. But this variable in line 1 is untouched. This variable will never be changed. I'm gonna actually write this over here so we have it. And that's something important once we get into more advanced functions that JavaScript has. It's really important for us to remember if our functions are making changes to our variables or if they are not. And now we can actually start to pass two arguments into the function. So I'm gonna say something like console.log, and let's pretend that we actually want to print just the string Kali in here. let me go back to my PowerPoint and let's try to see the index of Cali. So Cali starts at index 0 and finishes in index 3 right here. And a very common problem people have with this function is the fact that if we go into Visual Studio and we do original string dot substring and then we do 0,3, it's going to just print cal, because substring is not going to take into account the last index it gets passed. So for example, I need to pass 4 in here to be able to take the full extension of Cali. If we go back into our PowerPoint and I enable my whiteboard, it's basically doing something that looks like this, from this index over here until this index over here, but 4 is not going to be included. That's something that, at least when I was just beginning to understand this function, was a little bit confusing, so I don't want you to fall into the same trap that I fell into back in the day. So let's go back into the code. Actually, no, before that, I want us to think what would happen if we want to print heartbeat. So think, we want, oops, sorry, oh, haha, look at this beautiful dog. So I was gonna wait a little bit more to show you Cali, but apparently she really wanted to appear. So there you go, this is Cali, and she is indeed the heartbeat of the universe. But let's go back here. So I want to print from heartbeat, and I just want heartbeat to appear. So should I use index 20 or index 21? Think about that before I do it. I'm going to go back to my code and I'm going to say console.log from the start of the string is going to be original string.substring, and let's go back to my PowerPoint. So I know that heartbeat starts at index 12. So I'm going to start with 12 and I'm going to end at, let's try 21. Boom. So I get exactly heartbeat, which is just what I want in this code, just to show heartbeat. And that's basically what Substring is going to do into JavaScript. It's going to take a sub segment of the string and make it into a new string. So let's document what's going on before continuing. If we send 2 arguments into the function, we'll get from index start, I'm gonna call it start index, to end index, excluding end index. Yeah, so in this case 0 would be the start index and 4 would be the end index. If you are confused in any time, I'm going to put the description, the documentation for this substring function, and you can also hover here in Visual Studio. You'll see how the documentation is going to appear right here. Notice how the end has a question mark inside it. That basically means that the end value is optional. That's why we can send either just 1 argument or 2 arguments. And you may be thinking, how come your PowerPoint had the brackets to display that? Let's show you right here. That's basically, that bracket is going to be the notation you're going to notice in the official documentation I'm going to put in the description. So I kind of want you to get used to all the possible ways the documentation can tell you which arguments are required and which arguments are optional. Let's go back to the code, and I want you to, if you can, if you have time, will, and passion, I want you to tell me what's going to happen if I use, let's say, what would happen if I use, let's pretend 29 and 37 as indices, and what would happen if I use, let me copy paste this one over here, What would happen if I use just 29? And if you want to, I'm going to show my description over here, sorry, my string with all of the different indices, and I'm going to just tell you the indices. Think about what would happen if I used first 29, comma 37, and what would happen if I used just 29. Please put your answers in the description below if you want to. I think it's a really good practice to become a little bit familiar with how this function works. And to end this video, I just want to tell you a little bit more about what happens when you send weird or incorrect values into the function. You don't really have to memorize all of what I'm going to say right now, but I do want you to have it a little bit in your mind, just if eventually down the line the function is not really behaving in a way you think it's behaving, then you may remember about that weird dude on YouTube with the cute dog telling you what happens when you send weird or incorrect values, and then you can take a look at the documentation and see what's going on. So let's go back into the code, and I'm going to start by sending a value that couldn't even exist in the function. So I can say console.log, and I'm going to do original string dot substring, and let's send a really big value like 100. Notice how this is going to be assumed as an empty string. So let's make a comment about that. Out of bounds will result in an empty string. Now this is a very interesting behavior because that happens only if you send one value. If you send two values and you say you know what, I want to start at the second index, right? Then the first value is going to be okay, and the second out of bound version is going to give you the end of the string. So let's put it over here. Out of bound values in two, sending two arguments will in the end of the string. Now, what would happen if the two values are incorrect? Let's say, hey, I want something like this, from 90 to 100. So two out of bound values will result, let's put that in a comment, two out of bounds values will result in an empty string. Yeah, when would this happen? Well, it's not very common, but I do want you to keep it in mind in case that somehow your code gets confused or you get confused and you send an incorrect value right here. So let's try to play with a couple more weird cases. What would happen if now instead of sending two values that are too big, I just send the same value. Let's say that I want to start at 5 and I end at 5. That's going to give me an empty string too. And that's because you're basically asking the function to start at 5 and to end at 5, but remember, we do not include 5. So that's going to send the same value twice, will result in an empty string. That's something kind of important to keep in mind too. Let's take a look at a couple more examples. What would happen if you by mistake put them in the wrong order? So let me copy paste line 16. Oops. And let's put it right here. So what would happen if I by mistake send first 4 and then 0? Notice how we get the same values. I'm gonna put another comment, sending values send in two values actually, just in case, in the incorrect order. We'll reverse them for you. Now, I kind of don't want you to rely on this behavior because it's a little bit odd, but I do want you to keep in mind just in case your code is not behaving in the way you think it would be behaving. So sending two incorrect values will basically reverse them for you. Now let's see what happens if by mistake we send the wrong value altogether. So what would happen if instead of sending, let's begin with 0 and 4. If instead of sending 4, I send a very incorrect value like banana, take a look, we get an empty string because it cannot really see what's going on with this banana, right? It's not a real index, so it will just give you an empty string. So let's make a comment for that. Sending a incorrect value in the second argument will result in an empty string. And this could be any incorrect value. If you don't know too much about objects, that's okay, but let me try to send something like this. So it's gonna be an incorrect value that cannot be sent. And any value that doesn't really represent an index will result in a similar behavior. But now let's see what happens if I just send one value. Let's remove all of this and just send a banana. And then you get a completely different behavior. You basically get from the beginning of the string into the end of the string, which is basically the same as doing 0. Take a look at this behavior. I did tell you that I was going to give you a lot of weird examples, and don't worry about memorizing all of this, but I do want you to be vaguely aware about what's going on. So sending one incorrect value, let's do invalid value, is the same as sending 0 to the function. Yep, oops, I have an extra G over here, and the final edge case that I have for you is sending negative values. What would happen if by mistake you send negative values? Let's say that I have this over here, and instead of 4, I send negative 4. Take a look at that. We get an empty string too. So, does this behavior make sense? Maybe, maybe not. But I want you to become aware of what's going on and what may happen if by mistake we send incorrect values. I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over and over and over, but it's really important that we are aware of the edge cases and that we just keep track of what may happen. I'm gonna put this over here, sending negative values will be considered as 0. So for example, if I copy paste this over here and instead of instead of negative 4, I do 0, I get the same value. It's going to be the same if I do something like negative 8 right here, I should get an empty string. And that should be it. This is all that you need to know to be able to successfully use Substring as a beginner student. Thank you very much for watching this video, and thank you very much for spending your time studying to become a better software developer. I'm going to leave a couple of links in the description below that I think will be really helpful. The first one is going to be a link to all the code we used in this video. You can use it to study it, and feel free to ask me any questions. You can either post comments below, or you can send me messages through my site, Cadejo.dev. I have a section right there where you can ask me any questions. The second link is going to be a link to the official documentation for the Substring function. I think it's very important to keep official documentation close at hand so we can both answer any questions we both may have. And the last one is going to be a link to my website, where if you subscribe, you're going to get free updates about all my JavaScript content and about all my software development content in general. I really love computer science, so I'm really happy that you can join me in my quest so that both of us become the best developers we can become. And that's it. Thank you very much for joining. Say goodbye to Khaleesi, who is indeed the heartbeat of the universe.